Welcome to Mirage. This is Bryan Aiello, and today Jill Purrazzi is joining me, and we're going to be discussing the formidable Jules Verne. How are you doing?
Good. You're doing
I'm really
well.
happy to hear that. And this is your author. Obviously, you get to pick who you want to talk about, and we've actually had some really great conversations. H.G. Wells was one. Who was the guy
Yeah.
before that? Robert Louis Stevenson. That was actually Pirates, right?
Yeah, yeah, we talked about pirates in general, yeah.
If there was somebody before H.G. Wells that we talked about that led to our decision to do Jules Verne.
I'm trying to remember. I know we've done quite a few.
Yeah, we have, but I love Jules Verne.
Oh,
To
we did
that,
Scott Card.
Orson Scott Card, was that what led to this? I don't know. I was disappointed with Orson Scott Card's career, actually. I thought he would have more books. He just had
Yeah,
the one, basically, and then every book after that was basically geared towards filling out that world. I
yeah.
liked it. I like the idea, but I don't know. Do you want to write like that? You're not writing like that. You've written your science fiction. You've
hmm
written your and now you're working on your horror, right? Your more spooky stories.
Yeah, yeah. I'm kind of juggling both. And yeah, I'm gonna kind of wait and see how the science fiction trilogy hits before I decide whether or not I want to continue building into that world or not.
Yeah.
But it won't be the sole focus of my career for sure.
So what did Jules Verne do? I mean, he wrote 10,000 Leagues Under the Sea, right? Which is one of my favorite movies of all time, the Disney epic with Kirk Douglas. I think it's Kirk Douglas or Douglas, one of those K names. Right? It was my favorite movie as a kid. Watched over and over again.
Yeah,
Mystery Island. I mean, that was such a great movie too. And that's Jules Verne, isn't it? Or H.G.
yeah,
Wells.
I believe so.
And then everybody has seen the epic silent film where they launch a rocket and it stabs the moon in the eye. And we know that is Jules Verne too. I mean, that's my extent of Jules Verne. Never picked up a book and tried to
Yeah.
read him.
He's also wrote Journey to the Center of the Earth.
Yeah, I've seen one of those versions. I mean, there's a bunch, right? There's the old 1960s version, which
Yeah.
is horribly laughable. I mean, God, it's amazing if you think. Have you ever sat down and thought about making a movie? You know, the making it real like they do nowadays,
Yeah.
where everything just seems legit. In 1960, they didn't try to do that at all, did they? They just kind of threw things at the camera and said, "Okay, believe," and people just kind of did.
Yeah. 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 There is a different um, expectation there. Um, the suspension of disbelief was
Right?
definitely different.
You
Yeah.
had it with Doctor Who, right, in England, and Star Trek here as well. And then just really bad production qualities, and people just kind of accepted it.
Yeah.
Where did Jules Verne enter your life at?
Um, well, looking back, there's definitely been a lot of times where I've interacted with Jules Verne or the Vernian the vein of science fiction. Most of
Is
them,
it really called that, Vernian?
yes, yep, Vernian.
Wow.
Um, I've definitely seen a lot of mostly children's versions of those stories around the world in 80 days, which actually I'm reading right now. Um,
That's another great movie, right? I mean, they destroyed all of his fiction and made all the movies out of it.
I mean, that's what you do with the greats, right?
Yep. I mean, that's where I got him. But were you given the opportunity to watch movies as a kid growing up? I don't.
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay. I wasn't sure
yeah.
if that was like a restriction that you had as a missionary kid.
Um, yes and no. I didn't have access. We didn't have access to cable television or satellite or any of that kind of stuff. So everything that I watched was, VHS tapes.
Hmm.
And we were allowed to watch, one movie a week. Friday nights, we would all get together,
Wow.
watch a movie as a family with homemade pizza and Coke, and that was the only night we were allowed to have Coke and those kind of things.
We just made homemade pizza tonight.
Yeah,
Um, we So was it the book or a movie first that introduced you to Jules Verne?
it's definitely been movies first.
Movies first. Okay. Do
You
you
know,
remember what the first one was?
The one I remember most distinctly is actually the Jackie Chan version of Around the World in 80 Days.
Hey, Arnold Schwarzenegger's in that. And that was his last movie before he became governor.
Yeah. Which it was funny picking it up. I just picked it up recently, Around the World in 80 Days. Because I wanted to read it before this podcast, and slow and couldn't finish it, small as it is. But
How does it read?
It's very smooth reading. Of course, as someone who enjoys classics, it's a little bit more modern than a lot of the classics that I read. So it's easy to understand. It's enjoyable. Um, it's definitely been kind of interesting seeing the mindset of someone in that day and age.
Yeah.
Now, Jules Verne really wanted to travel. He loved the idea of traveling, and that's a common theme and motive you're going to see in pretty much anything he's written. Around the World in 80 Days.
Oh, that's very true. He does have a conveyance in almost every single one of his stories, doesn't he? The submarine, the rocket, the air balloon, two air balloons actually in this example, Mysterious Island and Around the World in 80 Days.
Yeah, and all those are stories of, exploration and discovery. So he had this great love for exploration, but it was quickly squashed by his father, and he stayed home in London like a good boy and did his schooling and decided to be a writer instead.
Wow, I didn't know anything about Jules Verne. He's French. He wrote in French.
Yeah.
Every book that we read from him is a translation.
Yeah, and that's actually, like I said, I'm listening to the audiobook of A Thousand Leagues Under the Sea, and the main character is French, and I was just kind of laughing about that because here in America we're used to picking up books about Americans. It's very rare that we find books about someone who's not American.
Very interesting. Around the World in 80 Days was written it was a serial in 1872.
Mm-hmm.
So this guy was writing in the same vein as a Charles Dickens or like a Sherlock Holmes author, Conan Arthur Doyle, publishing on a weekly basis or more so in the newspapers or whatever.
Yep.
I mean, he wrote a lot. His list is gigantic.
Yes. Yeah, it's quite the long list for sure.
I mean, what do you do? You get out of the classics or do you explore the other stuff that's available here?
As far as his books, are you saying?
Yeah.
I haven't read a lot by Verne.
Mm-hmm.
I just kind of started recently kind of digging into his work. And of course I'm familiar with it. Especially, there is that particular vein of, like I said, Vernean science fiction. But I haven't read a lot by him. I'm going to interrupt one moment. I forgot to put my headphones in, and I am worried that you are picking up my computer in audio.
Yeah, I am a little bit.
Okay. Do you mind if I run and get my headphones?
Go do it.
Okay. Okay, I am back. I apologize about that.
Hey, not a problem. Looking up, note the time, 14 minutes or so. What was I going to say? No, I want to dive into this Vernean science fiction thing that he started, and I am not able to find a reference to, let's see, legacy. Verne's novels have had a wide influence on both literary and scientific work. So he's one of those dudes, huh?
Yes, he put a lot of research into what he was doing.
A lot of these people are French, and I'm not going to even try to pronounce their names. I mean, we're talking like Marcel Amé and Roland Barthes and Rene Barjavel. I've never heard of any of these people.
Yeah.
I mean, what do they? They move on to, I guess maybe they, I'm just kind of looking through the names, seeing if I pull anybody out. Yuri Gagarin. Hey, that's a space guy who was born like 75 years after.
Yeah.
It's interesting. And he's Russian too. He was influenced by Jules Verne. I mean, who can say they're not, right? I think we
Yeah.
talked about this with H.G. Wells more than anything else. Where did it come from? You know, where is this coming from, this desire to write about the future, write about technology, write about how people can use technology to influence their lives in a different way than probably is already being used, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that's what we do as science fiction authors. We look at something that can be used differently
Mm-hmm.
and write a story about it. And that's
Yeah.
pretty much what he did, I guess. I mean, unfortunately, I don't know if a lot of this work is even available. Is it? Is that a question you have an answer for?
I think the bulk of his more prominent works are available.
So
Um,
prominent though. I mean, I would say the same thing where not everything though, right?
no, no, definitely not. And actually, a little bit of the research, I was listening to a YouTube video on Verne, and they were talking about one of his earliest novels. If I can remember correctly, it was France in 100 Years or something along those lines. Um, Let me see if I can look it up to be
I mean,
sure.
this guy's another example of somebody who wrote a lot of his best books right up front.
Yeah,
I mean, he started writing, his first book was in 1863, and he popped out Journey to the Center of the Earth in 1864. So a year after his first publication, he pops out Journey to the Center of the Earth. Best
yeah.
book ever, right? From Earth to the Moon, number 4. And then number 6 is 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. I don't know if Around the Moon is the same as To the Moon, Mysterious Island, Around the World in 80 Days. That's all within 10 years, right?
Yeah.
And then after the 10 years, I mean, after 1874, I mean, you have a lot of interesting sounding titles, right? I'd love to read Off on a Comet. That sounds really interesting. Is it? Is it going to be a really interesting scientific exploration about what it takes to live on a comet, or is it a wrong-headed idea of what living
Well,
on a comet would be?
I
It's
think
really
that's
interesting. Off of a Comet is the English name, and the French name of that same book is Hector Servadac.
huh.
It's
I'll
interesting.
look at
Anyway,
it
what were you
after
going to
the
say?
yeah, I was just gonna say the kind of the legacy of Verne, the Vernian fiction, that what we call Vernian fiction, um, are is kind of his research and his detail. Um, and in fact, I'm listening, like I said, the audiobook right now of A Thousand Leagues Under the Sea, 20,000 Leagues, sorry. I see it in front of me now and I always get it wrong. Um, but the first few chapters, he goes into detail about different boats and ships, companies, um, details about different names of different things. And he also goes into the details of how they all work, like the mechanical things. So he was kind of the first, hard sci-fi as we know it today. Um, Now, of course, his version is going to be a lot different from what we understand now. Uh, but yeah, he wrote realistic fiction.
Well, what kind of life did this guy have? I mean, his occupation was novelist, poet, and playwright.
Yeah. Yeah.
It doesn't even give an education that I can see. Now, maybe people weren't getting educated in the 1800s
Yeah. Well, I mean, it
or
definitely would look
1900s.
different. I'm just going off of from that what I picked up before was there was a forward at the front of the copy of Around the World in 80 Days that I picked up. That was quite interesting.
What did you glean?
I'm sorry, what's that?
What'd you pick up?
Around the World in 80 Days, the copy that I had.
Yeah, what did you read? You read the introduction?
Yeah, I had a forward about him and kind of gave some details about how he ended up staying home in France instead of um,
Mm.
traveling as he wanted to.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, travel definitely plays into his fiction in a big, big way.
yeah,
I mean, it's another one of those examples where his literary legacy has kind of been corrupted by Hollywood, right? The same thing with like Bram Stoker or Mary Shelley. Their novels were bastardized to the point where I only know them from the movies. Can I
yeah,
go back and try to pick up the book? Absolutely, but it's written in such a language that it's almost impossible to thoroughly enjoy as a work of entertainment, right?
yeah,
Instead, it turns into a piece of education. You have to study it for its educational values more than the entertainment values of it. I mean, does that works? I mean, you could study that and then go to the next generation and study that too, but life is so short. And what are you going to actually get out of it? Because I know I'm not going to write a story in the stylings of a Frenchman being translated into English over the last 125 years or something like that, 141 years or whatever.
yeah. Um, there's definitely there's definitely a significant portion of the reading community that is still reads and enjoys classics. For more than just studying sake, there's a few people that even I know who don't read outside of reading classics. They don't read
Mm-hmm.
the modern, and that was definitely me when before I started writing. I didn't read modern fiction. I read the classics exclusively. I didn't really have much interest. I took a few forays out and ran into unfortunate books like Twilight and kind of turned me off modern fiction
Mm.
pretty quickly. So, there's definitely still that portion. However, if you think about, for instance, the steampunk movement has a lot of Jules Verne in it, a lot.
No, it's very true. I think that whole genre owes itself to Jules Verne, doesn't it? I
Definitely.
mean, he's writing in the industrial age
Yeah.
and he's writing about science fiction. He's writing the science of it. There's no magic in Jules Verne's, but he does have that kind of steamy, twisty, pipey thing going on.
Yeah, well, that was, like I said, he was very well researched, and that was the technology that he had available for that day. So when he was writing his extrapolations included all of these steam powered things. Um, so you get this natural steampunk because he lived in that day and age. So of course it was going to be steam powered. Um, so that's definitely and steampunk has definitely picked up a lot of traction lately, um, both in fiction, in movies, um, and then like I said as well, because he was so well researched, he brought in that aspect in science fiction that was a little bit more grounded than H.G. Wells and some of his other contemporaries.
Well,
Um,
H.G. Wells wasn't a contemporary, though, wasn't he? He's the
no,
next generation up.
no, and when I say contemporary, I mean in kind of the widest sense. Um, I believe he came after. I believe they said a few of the people who were actually writing science fiction before him was Mary Shelley and Poe wrote a little bit. Um,
Poe's in the very beginning of the 19th century.
yeah, but
And I'm looking at birth dates here. This guy was born 40 years before H.G. Wells,
yeah,
and he died
so
40 years before him. So that makes sense.
yeah,
40 years is what their difference is, and that's a generation.
yeah,
He's a forefather to H.G. Wells. I mean, basically, H.G. Wells owes him a lot in terms of his
definitely.
literary career.
Oh yeah, yeah. I think Jules Verne was definitely the first author that we know of in modern science fiction that built a career off of the genre and built a popular career off the genre. It wasn't just accepted; it was very well accepted. Um, so that's that's kind of the beginnings of science fiction in general. There, the fact that he wrote well-researched fiction and that he wrote popular fiction is one of the reasons why he's known as one of the fathers of science fiction.
Yeah, and he was influenced by another guy that's very interesting, James Fenimore Cooper, who wrote Last Mohicans and those series of books. I mean, that was his predecessor, according to Wikipedia, according to the information I'm looking at.
Yeah.
If you want to look at who influenced Jules Verne, here's this guy writing American novels.
Yeah.
And it's odd, right? I mean, the French are looking at Americans for literature and culture in terms of, developing what is the future of literature. It's very fascinating. Um, Also, it's fascinating that he lived in Paris.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not some, back of the woods place like, I don't know, not to insult any town, but you know what I mean? It's like it's a very culturally significant place in the world that's constantly flooded with culture and stories and ideas, and he's right in the middle of it,
Yeah.
listening to it happen around him. And there's even a story in here about, how his relationship with his neighbors just really influenced the way that he wrote and what he wrote about. Travel, man, can you imagine being back? There's no getting on a plane. You had to crawl onto a boat, and it took months to get anywhere, and it sucked.
Mhm. Or
And
80 days specifically.
80 days to get around the world, yeah, right. What we could do it in a couple days now, two maybe less.
Yeah. Well, of course, you have to understand that that's how he viewed his time. And that's one of the major themes in Around the World in 80 Days is, the very fact that he's influenced by an American author kind of proves this, that the world was shrinking. And that was kind of the premise that Around the World in 80 Days kind of started with, is the world is shrinking. We
Mhm.
can, we can go anywhere we want with relatively little amount of effort. So, the very way that we view travel these days as being, wow, this is so much more advanced than back then, is how he was viewing travel when he wrote Around the World in 80 Days. And you can definitely see that thirst of the outside world, of exploring those things that for him was just at the tip of his fingertips, but not quite reachable.
Yeah, I mean, Journey to the Center of the Earth, that's his first big voyage book, right? Number three.
Hmm.
Actually, I don't know. I'm guessing because I already clicked on that title and moved to that page, so I have no clue what came before it. Adventures of Captain, can't pronounce his last name, and 5 weeks in a balloon. So 5 weeks in a balloon. I guess that's his first travel book. His first book is his first travel book. Doesn't really stray very far from his first attempt at literature. Supposedly, this is a series number one, The Extraordinary Voyages, and it's about a scholar and explorer who accompanies his man by his manservant. It's the same thing. The
It
Extraordinary Voyages, is that Around the World in 80 Days part of that?
is
Oh my God.
very
He wrote
possible.
54 novels. Oh wait, no, never mind. He wrote 54 novels entirely, and this is one of them.
Yeah. But I'm finding that the manservant is a common theme in his stories, though. Um, Probably because that's just kind of what was expected of men his age to have a
Interesting.
servant.
Kind of started that though, huh?
Yeah.
The man servant. I can't spell servant. Trope. Did he start the manservant trope? Servant
Well,
tropes.
yeah. Well, if you look at it, I watched at one point. I watched a documentary on comic books and specifically on superheroes, and they were talking about the rise of the sidekick, and how it was necessary to have this character who was kind of lesser than, kind of tagging around with the protagonist, because otherwise you have this character who doesn't have any dialogue and you don't have a natural way to explain things. Whereas if you have this little kid running around with a superhero, then the superhero can stop and explain these different things
Oh, they're very
to the
interesting. So
character.
they're the simple person that doesn't know that you
Exactly.
can talk down to.
Yeah. So, and it's even, even these days, when you have a character who doesn't know anything coming into a situation, especially where there's a lot of world building, it gives the other characters a chance to explain the world to that character and therefore to the reader. So you can see why it would be a very, very useful trope to have, because the servant is by nature not as intelligent or
Worldly.
whatever
Yeah.
as his master, and therefore gives the master a chance to kind of just show off how awesome he is.
And I'm looking at a list on tvtropes.org, which is like my favorite website ever. And it is like 75 different varieties of the servant trope. I
Yeah.
mean, anything from battle butler to battle thralls to what's the last one here? Work off the debt. I mean, there's tons of ways that you can work a servant into a story and kind of have that, I don't know, echo effect kind of in a way where you
Yeah.
say something and it comes back at you in a different voice. So
Yep.
your reader has two opportunities to kind of understand what you're meaning.
Yeah.
That's
And at
interesting.
least in Around the World in 80 Days, I'm not finding it so much the same with 20,000 Leagues. But with
Well,
Around
no,
the World,
didn't the good guy have a little buddy? If I remember the movie
oh,
correctly.
definitely. Yeah. No, but what I was going to say is in Around the World in 80 Days, the manservant is somewhat the viewpoint character, so that the protagonist can still kind of keep that air of importance and mystery, and you can't really guess what his next move is, so that there's still that kind of surprise without the protagonist losing his mystery.
Oh, interesting.
So kind of the same way that with Sherlock Holmes, he had Dr. I can't think of his name.
Who? I'm sorry. Go back 1 second. What did you say? The Doctor Who?
With Sherlock Holmes, he had his little
Oh, Dr.
sidekick.
Watson.
Yes, exactly. And Sherlock Holmes is written from Dr. Watson's perspective,
Yeah.
so you can't guess what's coming. Um, and yet the protagonist, Sherlock Holmes, still keeps that very, very intelligent because he knows what's going on, but Watson doesn't, and therefore the reader doesn't, and therefore the protagonist has a chance to kind of show up the reader and explain things to him and look so intelligent.
Around the World in 80 Days is actually part of this Voyages Extraordinaires or whatever it is.
Yeah,
The Extraordinary Voyages. I wonder how. I guess there may be 54 of them.
yeah, and I imagine those were all part of that serialization in the newspaper, correct?
Yeah, I would imagine. He wrote 54 of these extraordinary things, and it went from 1963 until he died. I mean, he wrote them until he died.
Yeah,
That was his entire career. A 40, what, 2 year career where all he did was write these extraordinary voyage novels.
yeah. Well, that's how
And
Dickens wrote as well.
right, but Dickens he had different stories though. I guess none of he worked within poverty, I guess, but
Yeah, well, Dickens had the serialization is more what I mean. Writing the serialized stories for newspapers and whatnot, as Verne did.
how awesome though, right? I mean, this is going to be an every week, every day. I mean, how often do these things come out? But
Yeah,
you, as a fan of his, I mean, you constantly had a new story, a new chapter.
yeah, and I definitely find it interesting that that was a common way of writing back then. And it kind of went out of fashion for a while. And now with self-publishing, that's actually becoming quite a popular choice again with readers, is to have something serialized.
Yeah. I mean, that's what Wattpad's famous for, right?
Yeah,
That's what
definitely. Go ahead.
a lot of people love, that chapter by chapter type of reading experience. A lot of those people
Definitely.
on Wattpad are very famous for their little
Yeah.
group.
Yeah. Yep. And there's definitely ways that Wattpad is looking to monetize that as well. But one of my author friends wasn't doing well. She wasn't doing bad, but she wasn't doing great with her writing as a career until she started doing this serialization and she started writing these books. The Dragon School. and now she's one of the top YA fiction fantasy writers on Amazon. Just from that, she puts it out, I believe, every 18 days, a novella. Um, so there's definitely still a hunger for that. That's definitely still a very.
She's your friend. You know her in real life.
I haven't met her personally, but yeah, I consider her a friend.
Um, well, I mean, I consider our conversations and on Twitter real life.
There we go. Yeah.
Unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't know which one you want to pick. But I mean, I want to ask if you think they're good. 18 days for a novella. I mean, how much it doesn't matter at that point. And is Jules
Yeah.
Verne putting effort into his stuff if he's putting, a chapter a week out or a chapter a day out? I mean,
Yeah.
how much effort is being done here? I mean, we consider him literature. We consider him a classic, but he was churning stuff, right? I mean, he was burning every single day a chapter of literature and putting it out, or a week or a month or whatever it was.
Yeah. Well, there's definitely an argument to be made. I've heard it both ways. People saying that a book can't possibly be good if it's done quickly, and other people saying that books are actually better if they're done quickly because you don't have a chance to overthink everything. Um,
Depends how
so
you write, though, right? I mean, you see how I write. I go back and fix mistakes. I mean, that's how I write.
yeah,
I write and then go back and fix mistakes, and I miss
definitely.
mistakes, and I skip things all the time. And that's why, I have awesome people like you and my wife who go back through and say, "Dum dum, you got to make this work." But I mean, how are they doing that? I mean, it took you a week to read my thing. It took my wife like 4 days or something. That's 14 days. It's 2 weeks that you have to put at least 20,000 words onto the internet,
Yeah.
plus the rewrites. I mean, how do you do that?
Yeah,
What
I mean,
user
I've had some experience with the serialization doing Wattpad, and the Raven Tree Society is serialized. And I
But you're not
know
doing a novella though, and you're doing
I'm
like
doing
2,000, 4,000 words of story, aren't you?
each story that comes out is a novelette, which is 10,000 words. And I know what I did with that is I actually did it during NaNoWriMo, and I wrote the entire thing at once and kind of got ahead of it, which is how I know my friend um, Sarah K.O. Wilson, who writes the Dragon School, she also does that. She tries to stay 3 or 4 ahead.
That's
So
a really good point. You're
yeah,
writing so far ahead that what you're publishing is like so old and perfect.
yeah,
It doesn't
you don't have the
matter.
time.
And you
Uh,
actually look miraculous because you spent a year writing 3 novels and then breaking them down into series.
yeah. So there's definitely people who I know are able to write really quickly. I think part of it is that the difference in personality and how our brains work. There are some writers who don't plan what they're doing before they write it, but we'd call the pantsers, or as my one of my critique partner calls them, exploration writers, because she doesn't like the term pantsers. And then we have the plotters, the people who plot out everything from their book and know how it works beforehand. And there's definitely people who spend 5, 6 years on one novel. Um, so I think it just kind of depends on how your brain works. Some people are a lot looser with their writing, and some people are really strict with it. And I don't think that one is necessarily better than the other, or one produces a better product than the other. I think it just kind of matters on taste, and they're going to have um, different audiences for sure.
Well, I mean, this guy wrote in French and
Yeah,
no English, I would imagine. So it's hard to say what he was writing in his native tongue. For me, anyway. I mean, I'm looking at his Wikipedia page only. Maybe if I devoted a good sum of time to studying who he was, I would get an idea of his abilities with the language, French specifically. Because I don't know, my opinion about translations is you have a book being written by an author in another language, and then it's your job to tell that story again in English, right?
yeah,
I mean, it's almost impossible to use everything that author intended, I guess. I don't know. I don't like translations at all. They really bother me a lot because I don't think I'm getting the author's voice. According
yeah,
to some people, though, and I had a few guests on the podcast who only speak a foreign language, and have had to have their books translated into a language they don't speak, and it's frustrating for them.
Yeah.
You know, one lady said it didn't come across the way that she wanted it to. She felt very disappointed in the relationship that she was developing with the translator himself. And he did a great job. He translated the Italian into English fine, but it just wasn't good enough. You know what I mean? It didn't capture that nuance.
Yeah.
So we know Jules Verne is awesome, but is he awesome because of the translations, or is he awesome because he was a great writer, or is he just a great storyteller? Like when I'm really honest with myself, I know I'm not a great writer. I'm a storyteller. I like to tell stories. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Was he that type of person? Was he a writer like a Dinar Kuntz who knows the rules, puts them down on paper and moves on, tells a story and goes on to the next one? Or is he a storyteller that is desperately trying to write? I don't know whether we'll know the answer to that. Does anybody know the answer to that? Can Jules Verne actually write?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think part of it is the spirit of the age, the interests of that society at that time. And if you think of how much we consume science fiction today, um, like just for instance, I know that Netflix is picking up almost exclusively science fiction
Yeah,
for for their
it's
releases.
very exciting.
Yeah, because that's what sells. That's what catches people's interest, especially in times when there's a lot of changes happening. For instance, right now, biopunk is really gaining steam because we're seeing, you know, genetic um, genetic augmentation, and we're seeing things like CRISPR, and also cyberpunk, because we're seeing these amazing bionic arms and legs, and of course the ever popular post-apocalyptic or dystopian based on politics, or based on the fact that we have these nuclear bombs just sitting around that could destroy the entire world. you know so it's definitely something that catches people's interest. And that's what he was writing about. He was pretty much the only person writing this kind of fiction, and writing it fast, writing it well researched, and writing it so that people in that day and age could see what was happening before their eyes, and then see an extrapolation of where that was going. How many of us would love to see the future? And that's what he was providing people, is a chance to kind of look into the future.
Yeah, that's totally true. It is about voyeurism, isn't it? It's about fantasizing about what's to come.
Yeah.
I'm
So,
wondering who his contemporaries were,
yeah,
because I know he wasn't writing in a vacuum. Because we know that Edgar Allan
definitely
Poe,
not.
was writing really awesome speculative fiction. Not even speculative fiction. Really, he didn't have monsters, did he? He was just kind of macabre. He was dark and wrote about murder and not too many ghosts or whatnot. He wrote about guilt and the human spirit and everything
Yeah.
like that, right? He was the precursor to the detective story, and that kind of took off in France as well. I think
Hmm.
Edgar Allan Poe had a contemporary in France, and I can't remember the guy's name. Um, but I'm wondering who Jules Verne's contemporaries were. Who was writing the stuff that he wanted to read during his lifetime? The influences of Jules Verne. I mean, that's fine, but I want to know who was writing at the same time as him.
Yeah.
Is he the only one that survived? Because I mean, this article says that he was writing children's books, which is interesting because if you're writing children's books, you're going to capture the imagination of children. Star Wars is a prime example of that. In 1977, it came out and it captured imaginations. It wasn't a great movie, but people defend it with their lives and hate everything that tries to redefine it, right? Jules Verne is writing for children, and his stories continue to live because they kind of speak to children, don't they? We kind of said we watched Jules Verne's movies as kids, and
Yeah.
you, with your inquisitive mind, said, I want to read the books too, and did. But our first experience as children was having the stories told to us in a cinematic form, in the cinematic format.
But you also have to understand that, in that day and age, if you were rich, if you were one of the wealthier people, work didn't look like it does now. It was a lot of there was
It was
there was
hard, man. People died going to work.
no, definitely, but for the richer people, they weren't doing physical labor, and they usually had these vast libraries where they would spend the majority of their time reading and understanding other places so that they could run their businesses better. So when you look at a children's book back then, they would have considered anything speculative or fiction kind of children's stuff. A child goes into the corner and imagines strange worlds. An adult reads biographies and histories and whatnot.
Yeah, I mean, a child can only fantasize about the world they live in because they know nothing, but an adult has at least experiences and he wants to fill in the blank.
Yeah,
Basically, is how it works, right? I mean, I read nonfiction because I want to know more about the world that I live in,
yeah,
and also want to write about that world too. I mean, I like realistic fiction.
hmm,
And Jules Verne was writing realistic fiction too, in a way, in a fantastical way, in a speculative way. Living on a submarine is interesting. Traveling to the moon is obviously something that can be done if you have the right technology. We proved it in 1969. He just really wanted to go there badly.
yeah.
Circumnavigating the globe had to have been a thing then too.
Oh yeah.
Around the world in 80 days. It wasn't just a balloon, was it? They used all types of transportation.
Oh no, definitely. It starts out mostly on trains. Um, so the portion I'm at right now, he is in India. He just left India and got to Hong Kong, and they boarded a ship. Um, so it kind of starts out mostly by train, which if you consider that time period, that would be kind of the newest thing.
Yeah,
Is
the heyday of train travel.
Yeah, they were laying down rails, and it was fast, and it was safe, and it was dependable versus going to sea and having storms, or going by foot or whatnot.
This author has been turned into over 300 movies, TV shows, and plays. It's
Yeah,
insane.
yeah.
It's insane. He'll live forever. I mean, I think ultimately writing for a young audience is what's going to make him live forever. I mean, he's just writing stuff that people. When was the last time a movie of his was made?
I wouldn't be able to say off the top of my head, although I do know that they put out.
Oh my God, you're right. Journey to the Center of Earth just a little while ago with The Rock, huh?
Yeah, but they did a second movie, also with The Rock, but with a different. I think it was the Mysterious Island, probably. I think because I'm saying this because I distinctly remember it coming out in the first year of our marriage, and my husband and I watching it together and laughing at The Rock. So I want to say there was a sequel. Maybe it was a direct to movie sequel or something.
I don't know. Mysterious Island. That was one of my favorite movies as a kid. I would have been very upset if they tried to remake that. That
uh, yeah,
or 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. I just
yeah,
don't understand why you want to remake movies. But then again, they're stealing from this guy anyway. I
yeah.
mean, he already told the story in the format that he told the story in, and the movie studios are like, how can we capitalize on this long dead author?
Well,
I
have you
know.
seen Disney's Atlantis?
Maybe. I don't think so. I can't remember exactly. I think that came out when I was in the army, and I didn't see a lot of cartoons then.
Yeah, understandable. I'm probably the kind of odd one out of most adults because my favorite movies are all either cartoons or like bloody, gory, historical um, dramas. Um, it's it's a steampunk, and I tell you, the opening of that movie, it's. I was listening today as I was drawing. I was listening to the 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea audiobook, and I was getting flashbacks to Atlantis, and as a child watching that. Um,
Interesting.
and it was definitely very, very familiar. Now, like I said, Verne is kind of part of steampunk. It's hard to extract steampunk from Jules Verne. Um,
What was that movie called? Atlantis?
Atlantis.
Straight up Atlantis?
I think it's Journey to Atlantis is what it
Oh,
is.
okay. Well, I misspelled Atlantis, so it didn't matter. I wasn't finding anything the way I spelled Atlantis. Journey to Atlantis. Actually, that's how you spell Atlantis. I'm not doing well. It's a movie by
Yeah.
J.J. Fortune.
Yeah, so it was, it was one of the earlier steampunk movies that came out, the popular ones, and that's when I say popular, I mean popular it's not popular with Disney, but it's it's one that people know well, um, but it definitely very much kind of lines up, and not beat for beat, but very much lines up with 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, and um, I'm interested to see as I continue to listen to it how much it all lines up.
I love this cover. I'm going to send you a link to it. Just looking at, they have the elements floating above the words. I can't make it bigger, unfortunately. There it is. Oh, it's blurry a little bit. Just interesting.
Yes. That's not the movie.
No, obviously not. No, this is J.J. Fortune. I've never heard of that person either.
No.
And I bet they're a woman, though. That J.J. thing makes me think they are hiding their femininity.
Hey, that's why I use J.E.
I know, it's sad that you have to do that. I mean, it's just to protect yourself, right? And to seem legit, because women aren't supposed to be writing or something stupid like that.
Well, it's specifically in science fiction and fantasy, more in science fiction, and it's not excessive any place that I feel like I wouldn't be able to sell my books if I use my full name. Um, but when it comes to adult science fiction, there's just kind of this concept that women can't write hard science fiction and they can't write dark science fiction.
Stupid,
Um,
yeah.
so it's just kind of this expectation that people would have that if they picked up a book by a woman, that it would be more like Hunger Games, whereas mine is a little bit darker, and a little bit more, like I said, it's closer to hard science fiction, and definitely cyberpunk isn't somewhere where female authors are readily accepted. So it's just my genre just makes it a little bit easier. I'm not hiding anything. If you go look at my social media, it's easy to see that I'm a woman. But if you're just scrolling through Amazon, I don't want people to be turned off right from the get go.
Yeah, again, it's really unfortunate. I wonder if this J.J. Fortune guy's alive still. Invite him on my podcast. I don't have much luck with like 80-year-old authors, though. They just don't seem to get it. They never have
Yeah.
headsets, ever, ever. So all of the entire podcast is just my voice echoing back over their answer to my question, because they're not even aware there's an echo somehow. I mean, it's playing into their home. That's why there's an echo, but they don't have a clue. I don't know. Let's see. I have not read too much of his work. I do not like translations. I'm incredibly interested in this J.J. Fortune guy, though.
Yeah.
He has written a bunch of books, like a bunch, and they all sound really freaking cool, like Journey to Atlantis. So maybe I'll find somebody to do a podcast on that person. That is like one of your favorite movies, isn't it?
What?
Journey to Atlantis.
No. It's you're probably thinking of Treasure Planet.
Oh, I am actually. That's true. That was your favorite movie.
Yes.
So I mean, what else do we need to know about Jules Verne? I mean, there's so much. Obviously, the guy lived for 77 years, and his whole life isn't just the. I mean, it's very interesting because he was busy, wasn't he? Every single day, his entire life, putting out these serials.
Yeah. Yeah.
He
It
never
was a
did
job.
anything
It was
else.
a career. Um, it's a little bit sad to me, especially as being a cross cultural kid. I grew up overseas and grew up in a village, and I definitely still love the country I grew up in. But when I was a teenager, I stayed home and I hid in my room and I painted and I wrote, and I was shy. I was an introvert. Um, and I didn't really take full advantage of the fact that I was in another country, that I was in another culture. Um, it was just normal to me. So now I'm home in the States, and when I say home, I definitely think of Papua New Guinea as my home. But now that I'm in the States and I've been here for some time, I'm starting to lose my grip on the language. Um, and it's kind of sad to me that I didn't take advantage of that. So looking at Verne and his desire to travel, it's just kind of sad to me that he never got to live that out.
Well, that's so interesting that you find that you're losing what you had,
Yeah,
right? And Jules Verne never had it.
yeah,
In fact, I mean, his entire career, he fought against the idea of being a science fiction author. He
yeah,
didn't want to be a science fiction author. He didn't want to write about science. He was writing about the Earth.
yeah,
He was trying to realize the beauty of style, which, puts a perspective on the type of writing that he was producing in French. I mean, aren't many French speaking countries. It's only a small percentage of humankind even know what he intended to do with his language.
yeah,
But I mean, he just wanted to talk about the world that he lived on. I
yeah,
mean, you can easily go back and talk about your childhood with some research. The feelings are still there. You know what I mean? It's like I
yeah,
have no clue what kind of apple tree was in the backyard of the first house that my parents owned. I mean, I could do maybe some research. It's never going to be exactly true, but I mean, we're just trying to capture feelings and guide the meditative act of reading
yeah,
without having typos, which for
yeah,
some of us is impossible.
yeah. Well, definitely, reading about India and his journey, his around the world in 80 days. There was definitely those, and when I say hints, they're strong hints of racism and imperialism in it.
Oh hell yeah, right? I mean, you can't get away from that. Unfortunately, these dudes
Yeah,
they dated themselves. I wonder what we're going to date ourselves with.
yeah. Mm, Human beings, we are, we are a strange
Yeah.
race. But yeah, that kind of what struck me is like, yes, he definitely had those hints there, but you could see his love and his desire to be in India, and his awe over these people that he'd never met before, this culture that he'd never experienced. Um, and he wrote about his main character, like not stopping to see the sights, and you could almost get that sense of disgust from him that his protagonist was rushing around the world and not stopping to enjoy what Verne wanted so much to see. So it was very interesting seeing that balance, that love specifically for India, that love of the culture and that desire to be there, mixed with that kind of imperialism and self-importance.
The thought struck me just now as you were talking that when he's describing India, having never gone there and just reading about it in books, he is kind of doing a form of world building, isn't he? He's
Yeah,
imagining a place and creating it in his mind and reproducing it on paper.
yeah,
That, in its sense, is a fantastical thing to do.
yeah,
I mean, it's definitely very speculative fiction oriented. But I mean, I had no clue that he wrote 54 novels, all in the same vein of extraordinary voyages. It makes
yeah,
sense now looking back on it and based on what you said about his wanting to explore the world. And he kind of did in
mhm,
his fiction. It's really, really magical to think about that.
yeah.
Um, and he did not want to be a science fiction author, but he ended up being one. And H.G. Wells is considered the father of science fiction, but it's argued because you have Mary Shelley too. What does she do? You know what I mean? There are so many other people that came of Voltaire. I mean, there are people that wrote science fiction before H.G. Wells. There are
Yeah,
people who are writing about extraordinary things. And that's one thing that Jules Verne said he was not doing, is he was not writing about the scientific extraordinaire. But he was, though, wasn't he?
yeah,
He was talking about rockets and submarines that you could live on forever. I mean, we have both those things today that he didn't have them last when he was alive. They weren't even a thing. I mean, you could have a submarine, the thing barely good underwater, went underwater, and you're going to die. I mean,
yeah,
basically, if you were a submariner, your whole job was to kill enough people in the 3 seconds that you were alive underwater to make your death worth
yeah,
it.
Which I'm
And
still just incredibly impressed that we had submarines as far back as we did. But yeah, they
we
weren't.
had submarines all the way back to the Revolutionary War.
Oh yeah.
They just sucked. They were horrible. They killed more people that used them than were against them in the battle or whatever. It's horrible. What do you?
Hey,
I
but we
mean,
tried.
what's that?
Said, hey, but we tried.
We tried, yeah, and we're still dying on submarines. Not a great idea. This hiding under the water. Here, Elon Musk is going to rescue those Thai soccer kids with a submarine. He's building it especially.
Really?
He's a crazy guy. I think it's going to turn out he's the biggest con artist of the 21st century. But we're
Yeah.
having fun watching him do it. I have just unbelievably stupid things come out of that guy's mouth, like flamethrowers, right? I still don't
Yeah.
even know what that's about. And he gave flamethrowers away? I don't know.
He is a character. He definitely is a character. It's fun to see his excitement over things. Um, but hey,
I guess he's like legit rich though. He doesn't have to worry about it. He's a
yeah,
billionaire.
like if you can, why not? You know, if he's like a little kid gleefully having fun with all of his science fiction toys. Um,
Would you be a part of his minion army if he asked you to?
no way.
You wouldn't be? You wouldn't be a part of the evil Musk army? God, that'd be
I
perfect.
hmm, here's the thing is I'm one of the science fiction writers who writes more from the perspective of science is evil, and not because I believe that science is evil, more because that I believe that people are evil. um,
Yeah, we are. We're evil little
yeah.
monkeys.
So we have this incredible power with technology, and the likelihood that we're going to make good choices with it. You know, if we look at bionic limbs, if we look at nuclear power, if we look at um, microchips in our brains, um, if we talk about, curing genetic diseases, what is a likelihood that that's not going to be used for incredible evil? And like, yes, I do think that people are capable of good as well. And I do think that some of those technologies, like we already seen them used for good. However, if we're talking about things like advanced AI and, like I said, genetic engineering, no, thank you. Leave me out of that.
I like the idea of advanced AI. It doesn't have to be sentient though. I want the machine to do all my rudimentary thinking. I want it to cook my dinner for me. I want it to drive me places. I want it to decide what I want to watch. What I want to see go away is all advertising. That to me is evil.
Yeah. Yep. Hard to say that one as a businesswoman, but yeah, I definitely am not a big fan of like how it's being
Yeah,
used.
I don't like it either. I don't understand what exactly difference it makes. I mean, if you want advertising, you need to be advertising me when I'm actually going to buy that damn thing. Because I guarantee when I need it and you've annoyed me for like 3 weeks straight of just, 1 minute ads or whatever, I'm not buying your product. I'm going to buy the one right next to you that didn't annoy me.
Yeah.
I
Which
don't
is,
know.
it's funny that cyberpunk, which is one of my chosen genres, is so like that is kind of a central theme. Just advertising oversaturating everything and the corporations owning everything that you can't live life without being bombarded constantly by advertisement. Definitely takes a very pessimistic view towards that.
Like Blade Runner, huh?
Yeah, or
You know,
even I didn't watch very far into it, but the went on Netflix recently. Not Mute. It was Carbon.
oh, I know what you're talking about. Carbon? No, not Carbon State, right?
No, it was
No.
something Carbon. Um, which this is off topic, but I'm looking it up anyways. Uh,
You're gonna say it, and it's like on the tip of my tongue.
Altered Carbon. Oh, yeah.
Okay, I had no clue.
Yeah, Altered Carbon is a cyberpunk on Netflix, which kind of flopped. But when it starts out, the guy kind of wakes up from the dead and he walks out into this cyberpunk world, and he's immediately bombarded by all of these advertisements because he has a chip in his head, and all of these augmented reality advertisements are just attacking him to the point that he can't even move, and he has a breakdown, and someone comes and is like, here, I'm going to do you a favor, and I have this like thing that you could turn off the advertisement so he can like function. But yeah, it's a very interesting trope in cyberpunk.
That's interesting. Would you recommend this Altered Carbon? Did you see
I
it?
I personally don't recommend it. Now for me, it's because it was sexualizing people so much.
Oh my God, I hate it so much. I call it pretty person science fiction. I mean, come
It's
on. I don't want to see everybody with abs. You know, every
yeah,
every girl does not have the perfect hourglass figure. I want to see some more. I don't know. I hate it so much. I
yeah.
can't
Well,
watch it.
it had a very predatory feel to it, specifically towards women, in which even the dead bodies were just like made to look very.
Sexy.
So I stopped watching it. I think I got 3 episodes in before I couldn't even handle it.
Yeah,
My
I
husband
probably wouldn't make it that
continued.
far. You probably gave it more than it deserved.
Yeah. My husband continued to watch it because he kind of ignores that kind of stuff. And he said it hits about halfway through the season and it just fell flat.
No,
It
really?
wasn't good at all. Like the storytelling just flopped. So I think I've heard maybe 2 or 3 people actually liked it. But for the most part, most people say you get to about the halfway point and all the potential just kind of deflates out of it. So
That's interesting. All Altered Carbon. I'm not gonna watch it. I don't know if I'm gonna read Jules Verne either. Right? I mean, I want to, but there's like a list of books that I need to read, and I'm not reading any of them to completion because I continue to get new books and start them. So just a horrible trend of not finishing anything lately.
yeah.
Anything else you want to add about Jules Verne?
I don't think so. I think, like I said, I'm not very well read as far as Jules Verne. Most of the stuff that I've seen from him is secondhand. Um, and it's very, I can definitely see how he had his fingers in what we understand as science fiction today. But it's hard to speak on the man himself without having read a ton of his work.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing too. Unless you're reading in French, are you reading his work? Right. I
True.
mean, what
Yeah.
is the intention? What was he hoping to do? And he was a YA author too. He was a kids author that has been kind of recaptured in a classic literary vein. I mean, he wrote 54 of the same book. Well, not the same book, 54 of the same series.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
interesting.
some of them are essentially the same book, at least the same premise to start off with. Man and his manservant travel somewhere amazing.
I mean, that's okay, right? I mean, you try to
Oh
get
yeah,
good at doing that, and I think he did it a number of times. I think his third novel, Journey to the Center of the Earth, did that. I mean, that's obviously completely made up hooey, right?
yeah,
You can't, and none of his stuff is like legit. It's just completely speculative nonsense. And that's why he's the king of speculative fiction because he did that stuff. He brought us to the center of the earth and the moon and the middle of the ocean.
yeah,
That's important. But I definitely think that we can spend a lot of time on him. We could write dissertations on his work and his influence on science fiction and literature in general. But overall, I mean, I do have to thank him for some really memorable moments as a child watching over and over again those movies.
yeah, yeah. And I think they're going to continue remaking, if not his exact movies. Like his spirit is definitely going to live on in steampunk. Steampunk is that you know gains more popularity and other works of science fiction as well. So
I'm trying to see if Jules Verne is in the public domain right now. Yeah, the complete works of William Shakespeare are obviously, right?
yeah, I would think he is, um, but if that many of his books have been made into movies, um, that's usually a sign that it's
Yeah, nobody wants to pay him anything.
yep.
all the effort that we put into this stuff. They'll just steal from us when we're dead. Perfect.
Can you steal something from a dead person now?
Well, I mean, you're stealing it from the children of the dead person if they have one, right?
Yeah.
Potentially, or the ancestors. But eventually, I mean, if it lives long enough, like Jules Verne's work, I mean, the people own it.
Yeah. Oh yeah, definitely. I definitely think that there's, I'm not totally against trademarks, especially as someone who is an author who's creating my own work. I like the idea that that will last for my children and potentially my children's children. Um, but at some point, how amazing it would be to have someone, 100 years from now, write a retelling of one of my books.
How about somebody making a movie about your life?
I, I'll keep it to my books.
I mean, it's crazy. I mean,
It's,
even characters are becoming real people. Is there Christopher Robin's gonna be a movie later on this? I mean, that's a character based on a real person, right?
yeah, it's kind of the new trend, isn't it? Because it also came out. My mom just watched The Man Who Invented Christmas, which I was telling her I have the book as well, and that's about Dickens. So it's kind of becoming a new trend to kind of look at the person behind
The
when
work.
I say new, I don't know if it's entirely new, but it seems like there's a lot of movies coming out like that lately.
Well, there was a Virginia Woolf movie about 10 years ago. I can't remember the name of it.
Yeah.
They've obviously done God, what's his name? The Gonzo journalist guy. Everybody loves him. I love him too. Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas.
Mm.
Hunter Thompson. They did his life a few times, bunch of times, honestly.
Finding Neverland can only do
I,
so many Peter Pan retellings before they talk about the
the
author.
actual author. I mean, they've done that a few times, haven't they? Haven't they made Barnes or Burns, whatever his name is, actually a character in a few of the books or the
Yeah.
few of the movies?
Yep.
Who are we gonna do next?
Um, I don't know. We're just talking about it. We could do Jay and Barry.
Let's do it. I was wondering if you'd want to. Of course,
Yeah.
I don't know his name though. Peter Pan. He was an asshole, is what I hear.
The
Actually, all
book is
these dudes are
horrible.
assholes. I think most men, once they get a little power, become assholes.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's not just men.
Okay, most human beings, when they have a little power, become complete jerks.
Yeah, I'm a
Damn, Barry.
cynic. I think we just in general. Here's my view of humanity. I believe most people believe that human beings are basically good with potential for evil. I believe the opposite.
You mean most people are evil with with the possibility of doing good?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah, that's very true. I mean, I think base everybody is just going through a I will take your sugars and become stronger and watch you die. And that's basically how we go through life.